Hello, beautiful community. You have been missed, and this is a quick blitz on the chat channel. What tools will Moscow be using to pressure the West to give up? The key message from the Kremlin is that this will be a very long war, and that this will be a disastrous war in terms of hurt and damage inflicted on Ukraine, no matter what the outcome is. And one of the fantasies of the Kremlin is to bring it about that democratic politicians, small d democratic politicians, who have a strong preference of supporting Ukraine, reach a position where it feels to them electorally harmful to retain that position. So the thing that the Kremlin would love to bring about in many major Western powers is a situation where those political forces that are, in terms of their authentic position pro-Ukraine, feel we've got to win. Can we win with this as a central plank of our program? So that's the sort of thing the Kremlin wants in 2023. What is the Kremlin's room for maneuver with mobilization in 2023? I can't comment on the military aspects of that room for maneuver, except of course that there are going to be diminishing returns as you scoop up increasingly people who have less and less connection with military experience. But politically, there is no limit. In other words, it's not a crisis management decision for the Kremlin to decide whether to do waves of mobilization or rolling mobilization. They're feeling neither approach will generate in the foreseeable future a political crisis. So they're relatively unalarmed about it and they don't feel terribly backed into a corner. Is the Russian economy about to collapse, or is it actually doing well? It's not doing well. It's really not doing well. So we're going to have huge problems with devaluation, with budget deficits, with contraction of demand, and we're going to see, and are already seeing, very palpable economic decline. But what no economic analysis that I'm aware of that is also reliable indicates is that the Russian economy is going to collapse. So I think that the stories that you see online about how the Russian economy is actually not doing that badly at all are bullshit, but it's also not the case that there are any grounds to expect economic collapse or near economic collapse with political revolution to accompany it. Not at all. Indeed, when we talk about the depths of economic decline in Russia, it's very important to not automatically translate that in your head into anti-Putin sentiment. It doesn't work like that. It could even work the other way around. You keep saying that Ukraine can't and shouldn't negotiate, but that Putin is also not opening to negotiations now, no matter what he says. When then would Putin be compelled to negotiate? When there is no path that he recognizes to anything that resembles a victory. And as a background to making sense of this type of question, it's very important to keep returning to a conversation that I think has been a very important conversation to have in this community. And that's that there are very compelling grounds to tie the Putin regime to this war, such that even if we gave Putin Luhansk and Donetsk, and even if he said, now I'm happy, he will not be happy and he will continue the war. Partly for these quasi-mystical reasons we've been exploring, but partly out of regime security. The longer the war goes on, the longer it has to go on for Putin, because he is, in part inadvertently and reluctantly, cultivating a pro-war set of political forces that he's going to inevitably have to appease. Recently, Michael Koffman, who's a wonderful military expert, said the following on the Unheard podcast. What do you think of this position? And the question here roughly is, does Putin losing badly increase nuclear risk? So I think what comes here in the question is 90% verbatim what Michael Koffman says, but not completely, so do bear that in mind. I've listened to that snippet just to make sure that this summary doesn't misrepresent it. Michael Koffman said that we haven't faced a high nuclear risk since 1983 Able Archer, but that an excess of caution about nuclear risk, that's to say us being too conservative in our support for Ukraine in the face of nuclear risk, is also not justifiable. He also said that a military defeat beyond what we've seen in Kharkiv and Kherson would make Russian nuclear use more likely. So it's the kind of defeat that would make the Kremlin feel that the war effort is no longer sustainable. The risk of Russian nuclear risk grows the closer Russian forces come to defeat. This is a continuation of the paraphrase of Michael. This would lead to a discussion in the Russian leadership about the proposition of nuclear use, and how that shakes out nobody can know. And that only depends on one person's view, Mr. Putin's. So far, escalation has been well managed by the West, but wars are unstable systems. What do you think about this? Well, my own distinctive contribution to this discourse, well, not distinctive, but the contribution I think has the most weight because it's not being talked about elsewhere, is not about nuclear use in Ukraine. It's about Putin's comparatively lesser reluctance to do World War III, something he's terribly reluctant to do. But I've made a video on the main channel arguing that his rationality about this is slightly different to ours. And that doesn't make a world of difference, but it makes a significant enough difference for it to be worth talking about. I think that I don't want to put words into Michael's mouth here, so let me say this from me. Yes, I do think that Putin losing badly and losing existentially in relation to regime security at home increases nuclear risk. And that therefore you could link escalating support for Ukraine with escalating nuclear risk. And Michael, however, says that that process can be managed and so far has been managed well. But then I add something else that's very important. And that's that it's very important that my recommendation is to take the side of those analyses that tie the Putin regime with this war mystically, pragmatically, from the point of view of defeating Western dominance and allowing Russia to come from the back row to the front of nations that are set in history. But also it's tied to regime security. So there is no way for Putin to disentangle himself from this project of escalation against the West, of which Ukraine is just one front. And that means that not supporting Ukraine would, in the medium term, give us, to put it mildly, uncertain nuclear risks too. And the only way you're going to get out of that conclusion, the conclusion that yes, Putin losing escalates nuclear risk soonishly, but Putin winning escalates nuclear risks too in the medium term to an uncertain degree. We can't be sure about this. The only way you get out of this conclusion is by arguing either that Putin never started with a firm commitment to essentially overthrowing the international order in NATO, or that he started with that commitment but is now so exhausted by the war that he has given it up and is now only interested in bits of Ukraine. And I think the correct thing to do is still to reject that analysis. Capacity allowing Putin is aspiring to a fairly limitless escalation. And therefore, nothing we do here simply liberates us out of the predicament of experiencing nuclear risk. So that's my couple of cents on this. Much love and talk very soon.